Hey, this is John. Thanks so much for joining me for this video. This will be the start of a new build series that I'm going to do, and this time we're going to be looking at Gunpla. The Gunpla kit that we'll be covering this time is the Gundam Bael Full Mechanics 1/100th scale model from Bandai. It's from the Iron-Blooded Orphans anime series, and if you don't know what any of that means, that's okay. The reason I chose this model, there are a lot of different types of Gunpla, or as many people call it, Gundam models of various sizes and scales. I liked this one. I thought it would be great to video because it has a full inner frame, which you'll see more of shortly, and very good detail, but it's a simpler kit than some of the more sophisticated master grade ones to build, and I thought it would be really good for demonstration purposes. Now, if you're not familiar with these kits, they're very, very high quality kits. The fit is excellent. They're push fit. You don't need glue, although I use glue quite often to make sure things stay together. And they're just really super nice. The construction follows a very logical sequence. There's a build of the inner frame, and the steps take you through that. And then once the inner frame is complete, you go through and work on putting on the exterior armor. And when you're finished, you get something that looks about like that. So this is a very cool looking kit, a very dramatic kit. So I think it'll be a fun way to cover building one of Bandai's Gundam kits. Now, any of the Bandai kits have a lot of parts, but it's generally not fiddly tiny parts. It's just a lot of parts. And so I've gone ahead and nipped and denubbed all of the parts for this kit and have them set aside in this little parts box. You can see it's quite a bit, but as we go through this build, you'll see that it's not difficult to handle. The worst part is over. Separating all of the parts from the sprues, cleaning up all of the nubs, that takes a little while. But once that's done, this type of logic of build seems to work really well. This will be my 25th or 26th Gunpla kit, so I've really settled on the wisdom of doing it this way. Okay, the first thing I want to do is take a look at some of these inner frame parts, which is going to be the subject of this video. I hope to get the inner frame fully painted, weathered, ready to go in this video. So there's various parts. Here's the torso, which I've already built up. There's the arms, which are fully articulated. There's leg parts. Again, I built up most of this. The way I built it up was as fully as I could without incorporating the other colored parts into it. So some of the parts, like these are extra hand parts and weapons parts, those have to remain separate. This is part of the backpack, so because it's incorporated into a lot of other parts, these remain separate. Some of the waist parts have to be fairly separated, but what I'll do is paint all of these up and get all of these ready to go in a separate stage from the rest of the armor. Now, for the painting, if you're going to be using acrylic paints, you'll definitely want to give the model a good coat of primer. I like Badger's Stynylrez primer. It works really well on these. You can paint and prime the inner frame before assembly, of course, but I just prefer to do it this way because I think it's a little faster. Now, there will be, on any Gundam, because it's articulated, you may paint some things and prime them, and if you move the model around a lot, it will scrape paint off, so be aware of that. I'm not going to prime it because I'm going to be painting it with lacquer paints. So lacquers adhere very well. They're very tough. So that won't need a primer coat to go underneath it. To make painting and handling these parts easy, I use a lot of these homemade alligator clips. I just bought a bag of 100 of these clips and some barbecue skewers and broke up the skewers and mounted them on these clips. And all I'll do is clip it to an area like that, and that allows me to paint it very easily. Remember when you're painting or priming it to paint it, if it's a part that articulates, paint it and then move it and paint it again or prime it again once the initial coat is dry. But I'll go through and put all of these parts up on I call them pterodactyl clips. Some people call them alligator clips. I call them pterodactyl clips. Thanks, Carl. And I'll get these put up, and I use these cat scratch pads to mount them in. Now you can make your own, simple enough, but I think my wife gets these for, 4 of them for $2 or something like that, something really cheap. And so this works really great to mount your parts in and keep track of them. And one of the things I do, because I have several of these, is I mark on one end, I don't know if you can see it here, but I mark on one end L and R, so I can keep left and right side separate, so I know which parts I'm working on. So I'm going to go through, get all of these on clamps, and show you how that looks. Okay, I have all the parts up on my clamps. I apologize, it's not a real great view for the camera, but I've basically broken it down into arms and legs for one side on different scratch pads, and then I have the upper part of the body and the waist on one, the backpack on the other, weapons on the other. So there's a logical layout to it that helps me keep track of everything. It only took me about not even 10 minutes to get these up on these clamps. Okay, there were just a few small parts that didn't fit on clamps well, and all I do with these, because it doesn't matter which side these go on, or they're easy to identify which side they go on, I simply put them in one of these little mixing cups, and when I get in there to paint it, I'll hold them with my tweezers in some way, get them painted and drop them back in the cup, and they'll be good to go. Okay, the paint I'm going to be using is Gundam Color Mobile Suit Phantom Gray from Mr. Color. This is a lacquer paint, and the lacquer paints, especially these Mr. Color ones and the use that I've been getting from them, they're very durable. I'm not going to say they're completely scrape proof, but they hold up much better than acrylic paints, I'm finding out. And this is a semi-gloss, which works very well for the finishing things that we're going to be putting over the top of it. So it's just a very dark color, and you can choose whatever color you want for the frame. There's certain things within the canon of the Gundam universe that people do, but you can make them however you want. So I'm going to go get everything airbrushed and show you what those parts look like once I get the paint on. All right, I have painted all of the parts. I've only got a few of them here so that I can show those to you. Like I mentioned earlier, I painted them first in their straight position like that if they had articulation, and then after I gave it a minute to dry, I'd articulate all the parts fully and paint them. And you have to, there can be waist parts or joints up here that turn at the hip, the ankle, so be sure you keep track of all of those different points of articulation. But now that I've got it gray, painted the gray that I wanted, I've got to make some decisions about how I want to do the rest of the frame, because there's a lot of ways, as with any model, there's a lot of ways to do it. I'm going to do, I think I'm going to do kind of a steely look to it, so I'm going to do some dry brushing with metallic color, and then I'm going to go back in and paint. There's lots of tubes and piping and pistons and all of those things. And I'm just going to use 4 or 5 different colors, some metallic, some not, just to really try and give some splashes of color. The armor on the mobile suit is going to be essentially white and blue, so there's not going to be a whole lot of color to the exterior, I guess you'd say. So adding a little color to the interior will give some nice look to it. So I'll start off doing some dry brushing and show you. I know you've probably done it before, but I'll show you how I do that, and we'll continue on from there. All right, for the dry brushing, I'm going to be using this Vallejo Model Color Natural Steel 7864. I looked at several metallic colors off camera, so to speak, and I really like this one because it's definitely got a steely look to it, but it's got just a slight bluishness to it that I think will go well with the colors. Now I'm using this is actually an eye makeup brush. I don't know the exact name, but it's great for dry brushing. You do have to work the paint off the bristles very well because it holds a lot of paint, and you can go in and find yourself adding way too much very quickly. So I like to start on an area that's going to be covered by armor just so I can see how it's going to look, and I'm going to start dry brushing that on. Now I'm not looking for a real wet coat of dry brush here. I really am mainly focusing on the edges, not on getting complete coverage. Now a lot of these details I'll be painting over, like these circular pieces here, but I'm going to go ahead and dry brush those. One, it helps me to see them, but two, it also gives me it keeps me from just having to worry about, don't hit that part. I don't care if I hit it, because I know I'm going to be painting over it. But I do like, when I'm dry brushing with this type of brush, I do like using the paints unthinned, because if you thin the paints, I've found even just a little bit of thinning, it gets up in the bristles and you have a devil of a time trying to unload all the paint off the brush so that you can make it so you can make the dry brushing work for you. But I will continue on with all the parts doing this kind of dry brushing just to give it a little bit of edge highlight, and once I'm done I'll show you what that looks like. Okay, I finished up the dry brushing, and as I went along I realized it was giving some nice weathering effect also, so I went just a little heavier than I'd originally intended, but I really like the way that it turned out. This is going to give me a good basis for one of those nice Terminator looking frames. So the next step is going to be going in and hand painting and using a few other techniques to detail up all the little greeblies on the armor, or in the inner frame rather. So I'll get the paints and everything else prepared to do that, and start on that and show you what I'm going to do. All right, the next steps will be to paint some of the details, undercoat it with this Vallejo Model Color Sky Gray. I want to have a lighter base coat on things like these tubes here and on some of the piston detail, so that the colors that I paint over it will not be fighting against that dark background. So all I'm going to do is I've got my paint loaded up in my palette over here, and I've just added a few drops of flow improver and a drop of water. So I'll get in here and I'll just begin painting in this detail. Now, if you're building this and you're painting this in, it would probably be faster to just paint the whole thing and then go back later and fill in the gaps. But I'm going to try and do it the other way, because why not do it a little harder? but it means that I'll get that good solid base coat in there, and a good shadow line between the pieces of tubing. There's a lot of it on the legs and the arms. You have to, there's some here right there on the arms. There's some here, here, up here. Quite a few places on the torso, other pieces, the waist, other parts, and of course the other side, the legs and the arms from the other side has that. And so there's quite a bit. So be careful when you're doing this to not miss those. Now, if I sound a little loopy in this next few segments, it's because I have been up almost all night. Right now it's about 4:30 a.m. and we are waiting for word on the birth of our first grandchild, a little boy. His name is Benjamin Charles Bias, and my seriously beleaguered daughter-in-law has been in labor now for something like 36 hours, and so we've not gotten a lot of sleep, and I'm running on caffeine, but I figured I may as well get this done because I can't sit around and worry about it. So if I sound a little tired or misspeak or anything like that, that's what's going on. So I'm going to continue doing this work here on painting all of these tubes, and when I'm done, I'll come back and show you what that looks like and move on to the next steps. All right, in real time, about 1 hour has elapsed, and I painted this. It didn't take the full hour to paint it. We spent a little time celebrating because I just got word that my grandson has been born. He's 6 pounds 11 ounces, healthy, and I am now a granddaddy, so I thank God for that. That is just something we've been waiting on, and I'm just feeling so blessed I'm about to bust. So anyway, I painted on this sky gray color to give me a good undercoat for the later colors. The first color I want to go in on top of that with is this Ammo of MiG metallic, Warhead metallic blue. I'm going to use that for the pipes. I thought that would be a good way to go along with the blue color that's going to be on the outer armor, which is going to be a little duller, so I want a little shiny blue on the frame. So let me get that ready, and I'll continue painting. Okay, this Warhead metallic blue, it covers fairly well, although it won't, by having this lighter undercoat, it won't struggle to go on. But the way I paint it is I get a fairly heavy amount of paint on my brush, and instead of brushing it on, I do more of a dab on. It will dry very smooth, but you get good opacity and really good shine when you dab it on there. If you try to paint it on, it can get a little streaky. It can be a little transparent, and if that's what you're going for, it'll work well. But it gives a really, really vivid shine. Now, if you put any matte coat over it, you're going to lose that shine, of course. But if you leave it uncoated, you'll get a really, really bright blue metallic look to it. So I'm going to continue going on all around all of these tubes, on all of the parts there, and get that blue painted on, and then I'll show you what it looks like. All right, I have the Warhead metallic blue painted on, and it's, like I said, it's a really bright, shiny blue. I like the way it looks. It can, in some places, it will almost pull back from edges a little bit on the first coat. So generally what I do is I give it a good coat, let it completely dry because it's a little sticky, takes a little while to dry. But I'll go back in and touch it up a little bit later. But in the meantime, I'm going to go ahead and start painting these pistons like this with another ammo color, metallic orange. And normally I paint these red to kind of convey, you know, danger, giant stompy robot parts. But because there's the majority of the color on the suit, aside from the white, will be blue, I decided to do a little bit of color wheel theory. And so the opposite on the other side of the color wheel from blue is orange. So I thought I would go with that just to sound artsy. So I'm going to start painting this on, and it's a little less opaque than the Warhead blue. So what I do is I'm very deliberate about coming in with a fairly heavily loaded brush and dabbing that on. And it will look very thick and gloopy when you first do it that way. But when it dries out, it should smooth out nicely. It's a good color. It's not quite as vivid as the blue, but it's still the best metallic looking orange I've found. I think if you give it a try, you'll like it as well. So I'm going to continue painting these pistons around the suit. Well, I don't think these are actually the pistons. I don't know what the part is that the piston goes into, but the piston socket thingy dealy that they have around the suit, and I'll paint those and show you what it looks like when I'm finished. Okay, I've painted the piston thingy dealies, the metallic orange, and I'm letting that dry. And just like the blue, I'll go back and touch up any areas that need touch up later on. And I like the way that looks. It's a very cool color. Actually, I suppose technically it's a warm color, but I digress. The next thing I'm going to paint are the pistons themselves that go into these other thingies, as well as some additional detail like this grill looking thing here and these ridged areas around the joints. I'm going to paint those using Citadel lead belcher. It's a bit of a steely silver, covers very well, and it'll provide just a little bit of metallic brightness to this inner frame parts. So I'll get the paint set up and start painting that and show you that here in a moment. Okay, in that last segment I misspoke. I'm not going to be using lead belcher. I'm going to be using Vallejo Model Color Natural Steel. It's a little shinier. It's very close to lead belcher, but just a little more silvery. So it's a very good color. And it's what I used for the dry brushing, and it has a bit of a silvery tint to it. Now, most of these pistons that I'm going to be painting, like right here, those are in a fixed position. They don't actually move. They look cool, but they don't actually do anything. Those are easy to paint. These right here along the waist, those actually articulate. So when you're painting those, you want to make sure that you extend them all the way when you paint them. Give them plenty of time to dry, then articulate them back, and then see if there's any scrape, and if there is, you may have to deal with that. One possible way to deal with the scrape that I've done is to use a Sharpie silver pen. That seems to be a little more durable, but where it does scrape, it's probably going to be fairly hidden, so you don't have to get too worried about that. But I've thinned some of the paint in my palette, and I'll just pop it out there like that and go in and start painting it on. This paint covers fairly well for a metallic paint, but you may have to do 2 coats. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to paint all of these silver parts and give them 2 coats. I'm also going to be painting these areas along the joints, right in the middle, just to provide some contrast. I mean, you know, from a material standpoint, I don't know that if this were a real thing, that's how it would be. But there's a little bit of detail in there, and I just thought it would look kind of cool to have those painted. So again, you have to paint part of it, let it dry, then articulate the leg back out and paint the other side. So there's several places that need to be painted. I'm going to continue doing this silver paint around the rest of the parts, and I'll come back and show you how that looks. Okay, I have the silver details painted on there. You might be able to see the pistons here and the silver detail that I painted in there. If you're painting this, don't forget that you can see it from the top and the front. I removed this piece to be able to get to that, but I painted additional detail in there, and you'll see that I painted the joints as I talked about, the space between the joints, and just to give that a little bit of a mechanical look there, and I think it makes it look cool. Now the next color I want to add is to these areas here. There's some circles around the joints. I don't know whether there's some kind of giant bolts or plates or what they're supposed to be, but in my imagination, I think they need to be Balthazar gold. Now, Balthazar gold is not gold. It's actually more of maybe a bronze color, but it's a paint I really like using. I like the way it goes on. Citadel. It's a Citadel base paint, so it's got a lot of pigment in it. So I'll get this paint ready and show you how I paint that on. Okay, I've got my paint loaded in my palette, and I added just a couple of drops of water to get it thin enough to use, and I'm just going to go in here and paint these parts along here. Now I apply it just like with the ammo metallics. I apply this kind of thick because I want it to really get well covered. I don't mind doing this in one thick coat because it will level out when you put enough. Do I have that in focus? I apologize if I don't. When you put enough paint on for it to self-level, it dries very nicely and keeps its metallic sheen. So I try not to thin this too much, but rather go with a fairly heavy coat of it, and then go back later if I need to and touch up any parts that aren't looking quite right. But it's a great color, and I'll go around the rest of the model and paint these parts. Note that on a few of them there are edges that look as if the color should continue on, so make note of that, because some of these areas are recessed like this one, and that there's no edge to paint, but on these down on the joints here at the knee, that has a recessed area, so, or a beveled edge that would need to be painted, so be sure and pay attention to that. So I'll continue on and show you how that looks. Okay, I finished painting the Balthazar gold on those parts, and you can see how that looks, hopefully. I apologize, I've been reviewing some of the previous segments that I that I filmed, and some of them are horribly out of focus. I do apologize. I can't actually see the camera from where I sit the way I have it configured. So it's not an optimal solution, but I work with it. Anyway, there's the parts that I've painted so far that I'm using for demonstration. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add some Nuln oil gloss as a shade to the parts. Now the reason I want to use gloss is because I want to keep the frame shiny. I don't want to put regular Nuln oil on it because it's matte. It'll dull it down. So by using the gloss, of course, it'll keep things looking shiny. Now I'll be fairly liberal in the application in some areas because I'm okay if it looks grimy, you know, a bit dirty, like here in the joints. That's okay with me if it looks a little grimy there. The same way around the pistons and things like that. If those look like they have some oil on them, then that's just fine. I'm going to be a little neater here in the joints between these tubes. While I don't mind them looking oily, I generally want them to remain fairly distinct between the color separation. Just personal preference, really. But I'll go around and apply this Nuln oil. Now, the reason I like using Nuln oil for this, and I probably should have explained this a little earlier. Bandai plastic. I've got Warhammer on my mind. I was working on some Warhammer stuff earlier. Bandai plastic is different than most model plastics. Most model plastics, you know, your Tamiya, your Hasegawa, your Citadel, things like that, once they come out of the mold machine, the die, they are put through a process called baking, which what it basically does is changes the basic chemical composition of the plastic so that it's much harder, very brittle by comparison to Bandai plastic. Now that process makes the plastic resistant to enamel thinners and lacquer thinners, as long as they're not flooded on there. It makes it fairly tough. However, it also induces some shrinkage, which, while most of the better manufacturers are able to control it somewhat, you can never completely get it just right. There's always going to be a little bit of variation, and that's why on most, I guess you'd say, traditional kits, there's always a little bit of a fit issue here and there, especially among manufacturers who don't have such a refined process as Tamiya or Eduard. Bandai avoids that fit issue by not baking their plastic. However, by not baking their plastic, it's much more susceptible to thinners such as enamel thinners. I can put enamel-based products on the separation between these tubes, for example, and it'll work just fine. But if I let a little bit of that enamel thinner get inside this joint and it gets up in there where it can't evaporate quickly, it will split the plastic apart. I mean, it will literally cause the plastic to fall apart. I've had that happen on another Iron-Blooded Orphans kit, and the knee shattered into about 5 pieces. Now, I was able to take it back apart and glue it together, and everything worked out okay, but it's an incredible pain when that happens. Now, the trade-off, I think, of a better fitting kit is worth it, but it's something to be aware of. Now, I say all that to say, when I'm using Citadel Nuln oil, I have not had any problems with it damaging anything if it gets in the joint. It's water-based and seems to be very Bandai plastic friendly. Now, of course, if you've had experiences that are counter to that, I'd love to hear about it, to know what the conditions were so that I'll be aware of that. But I've been very pleased with using it and the application of it on Gundam kits and on Star Wars kits and other Bandai kits that use the same kind of plastic. So anyway, with that major soliloquy out of the way, I'll go ahead and continue putting this on the model and show you what it looks like when I'm done. All right, I've applied the Nuln oil to the surfaces. It doesn't make a huge difference, but it does add some separation there in those blue tubes and gives some very distinct lines here in the bronze parts, and some oiliness to the piston area. So that works for me. In a few areas where there was recessed detail, I think one of the most notable areas was here along the arm actually. Right there's just a little recessed area and some panel lines and things. I just went in any areas like that with the Nuln oil and put it in and just darkened it up a bit. See, I missed a place right there. Let me get that real quick. I just go in right there and just fill that area with it. There. And it'll give it a little shadow right there. So the shading is done, and the next step I'm going to take is basically to go over these parts that I've been using to demonstrate on and the full set of parts, and just look for any areas that need touch-ups, any additional shade, any of the blue or orange metallic paints, anywhere where I want to punch up an edge maybe with a little more dry brushing, and just really look at it holistically to get it looking like I want. And then I'll put it together and show you what that looks like and kind of get a feel for how it looks as a whole, and then go from there. All right, I have the inner frame assembled and I've gone over it, and it's looking pretty good to me for this stage. You'll see that all the parts kind of fit together really well. It's fully articulated. The movement is a little stiff because of the paint, but I'm okay with that because I'll eventually sell this and I don't want it flopping around when the buyer gets it and being kind of like a rag doll. So I'm okay with that. Now, what I'll do for the next steps, the inner frame, I'm happy with it as it is. And so I'll go ahead, and the next steps will be painting and putting on the outer armor. I may do a little bit of weathering to the frame once I see what will be visible after the outer armor's on, and you know, based on how the outer armor is looking and what I'm doing with it at the time. So there may be a few more steps, but it would mostly be weathering or color touch-ups. Okay, just to briefly touch on the next steps, I've got all of these armor parts here that are going to need to be painted, and I'll start mounting them on the kit. Now, I'll paint them, I'll mount them up on the pterodactyl clips and paint these separately. And I'll probably go ahead and do the panel lining while they're separate, so that I don't have to worry about enamel wash getting into joints and stuff after it's been built. I can panel line it ahead of time, put it all together. A major thing that you can do at this stage is test and see where seam lines might be and how you want to handle them. For instance, here's two shoulder parts. Now, the way these parts go together, they'll snap together. One thing to be aware with Bandai kits if you're not ready to snap it together, don't, because you may not get it apart again. But they snap together and simply slide over this framework here. So because there'll be a seam line there, this one will be real easy to snap together and just smooth out, fill in and smooth out that seam line so it's not visible at all. Because I won't have to, if you have to assemble any additional parts between it that are different colors, that can make it a little more problematic. Now, to put something together and then make it, to be able to pull it apart easy, a lot of times what I'll do is I'll either trim these pegs here, or if they're like these where they're not solid pegs, I'll just put a clip. I'll just snip one side of the female side of the connection, and the parts will come apart fairly easily. They'll hold together, but when you're doing your final assembly, you can just glue them. The other way that I treat seam lines like this is if it's not going to be practical to put the part together, glue it in place, fill on the seam line, and just stick it on the model, then I'll temporarily put it together and grab my Tamiya scribing tool and scribe a panel line along the seam. And I may even use some chisels to do a few cutouts so that it looks like it's supposed to be there. That way I can paint it separately, and when I put it together, it all just works. It looks organic. So I'll go over that probably in the next video also, but just in case I forget or get ahead of myself, I thought I'd point that out a little bit here. All right, well, that's going to do it for this part of the build of the IBO full frame Mechanics Gundam Bael. I've got the inner frame done, and it's ready to move on to test fitting and painting the outer armor parts, which will be in part 2 of this video series. This is a Patreon exclusive video series, so I would ask that you not share the link to the YouTube video, but rather, if you want to share it, please share the link to the Patreon page that this video is on. And as always, thank you so much for being a patron. My family and I are very grateful for it. It makes this and the other things that I do possible, because otherwise we wouldn't be able to afford for me to do this. So thank you very much. And if you haven't built a Bandai Gundam Gunpla kit, even if it's not this one, if you haven't built one, pick one up. I think you'll have a lot of fun with it. I certainly enjoy them. So with that, happy day to you, friends. Bye-bye.